The first report. It did not begin with an announcement. There was no global alert, no emergency broadcast, no official statement warning that something had changed. There was no moment anyone could point to and say, "This is when it started." Because when it started, nothing appeared different. The lights still turned on, the air still moved. The world continued producing its familiar collection of sounds: distant traffic, electrical hum, footsteps passing through rooms without consequence. Everything behaved exactly as it always had, except for one person. They were alone when they first noticed it, not in an unusual place, not in an extreme environment, just a quiet room, late enough that the outside world had settled into its slower rhythms, the kind of silence most people never question, the kind that feels stable, predictable. It was inside that silence that something else existed. At first, it was easy to dismiss: a low frequency, so faint it did not feel like a sound in the traditional sense. It did not interrupt thought. It did not demand attention. It simply lingered beneath everything else, steady and unmoving. They assumed it came from somewhere nearby, perhaps an appliance running in another room, a ventilation system hidden behind the walls, the distant vibration of infrastructure carrying energy from one place to another. Modern environments are never truly silent. There is always something operating just outside awareness, so they ignored it, or at least they tried to. But ignoring it did not remove it. It remained exactly where it was, not louder, not quieter, constant. They stood up and walked across the room. It remained. They paused, listening more carefully, trying to locate its origin. Sound, by its nature, occupies space. It moves outward from a source. It changes depending on your position. It grows stronger as you approach it, weaker as you move away. This did not. It did not behave like something external. It behaved like something fixed. They moved closer to the walls, pressing their attention against surfaces, expecting to feel vibration. Nothing. The walls were still. The floor was still. The air itself gave no indication that anything was moving through it, and yet the frequency remained, unchanged. They left the room. The hallway was different, larger, less enclosed, filled with the subtle shifts of pressure and space that always accompany movement between environments. If the sound had belonged to the room, it should have disappeared the moment they crossed the threshold. It did not. It followed, not trailing behind them, not catching up, simply present, exactly as it had been before. They stopped walking, held their breath, listened. The frequency did not depend on motion. It did not depend on location. It existed independent of environment. They stepped outside. Night air carried its own texture. Open space behaves differently than enclosed space. Sound dissipates. Vibrations weaken. Distance becomes measurable through the loss of intensity. This did not weaken. It did not change. The frequency was identical to what it had been inside, steady, unmoving, unaffected. At this point, it would have been reasonable to question perception itself. The human brain is not a passive observer. It fills gaps. It creates continuity. It produces sensations in the absence of external stimuli. There are known conditions in which people perceive sounds that do not physically exist, but this did not feel imagined. Imagined sounds fluctuate. They shift with attention. They fade when ignored. They rarely maintain perfect consistency. This did. It did not flicker. It did not distort. It did not react to doubt. It simply existed. They returned inside, sat down, waited. Minutes passed. The frequency did not drift. It did not fluctuate. It did not acknowledge time. Eventually, they stopped trying to identify it, not because they understood it, but because understanding requires change. And this did not change. It did not evolve. It did not progress. It did not resolve itself into something recognizable. It remained exactly what it had been from the moment they noticed it. Constant. They slept. Morning arrived. Light entered the room, restoring the visual structure that darkness temporarily removes. Familiar objects reasserted their presence. The world returned to its expected configuration. The frequency was still there. It had not paused during sleep. It had not faded with unconsciousness. It had not required attention to sustain itself. It was present before awareness and present after it returned. They went through their routine. Movement, water, voices, environmental noise layered itself across perception, temporarily masking the lower structures beneath it. But masking is not removal. The frequency remained underneath everything else, waiting, not interfering, not announcing itself, simply continuing. By the end of the day, it had become impossible to remember what silence used to feel like. Not because silence had disappeared, but because silence had never truly been empty. It had always contained something, something stable, something continuous, something that had been present long before it was noticed. And now that it had been noticed, it refused to disappear. At the time, it was still possible to believe this was an isolated experience, a minor anomaly, a harmless irregularity within perception. There was no reason to assume it extended beyond a single observer, no reason to assume it existed anywhere else, no reason to assume it existed at all, because nothing in the external world confirmed it. Nothing moved, nothing vibrated, nothing revealed a source. Only the observer remained, and the frequency, steady, unchanged, waiting. The pattern emerges. At first, there was no connection between the reports. They appeared isolated, unrelated, easy to dismiss. One person describing a low, continuous frequency that could not be traced to any identifiable source was not unusual enough to demand attention. Human perception is imperfect. It is vulnerable to error, to suggestion, to internal processes that create sensations without external cause. Most anomalies end there, contained within a single observer. But this one did not, because it did not remain singular. Weeks later, another report appeared, then another and another. Each one separated by distance, each one separated by environment, each one separated by every known variable that normally links shared experiences. The individuals had never met. They lived in different cities, different countries, different climates. Some lived in dense urban centers filled with electrical infrastructure and constant mechanical activity. Others lived in rural regions where artificial noise was minimal, where silence behaved the way people expected it to behave. But their descriptions were identical, not similar, identical. They described a low frequency, steady, continuous, unchanging, not loud enough to dominate awareness, not weak enough to disappear, positioned precisely at the threshold where perception becomes uncertain, the place where something can exist without being fully acknowledged. Most of them did not notice it immediately. For some, it appeared during moments of stillness, late at night, early in the morning, periods when the brain relaxes its constant filtering of sensory information. For others, it emerged gradually, not as a sudden intrusion, but as a slow realization. The understanding that something had been present for longer than they could remember noticing it. They all made the same assumption at first, that it came from the environment. They checked their surroundings, electrical devices, heating systems, structural vibrations, external machinery. They moved between rooms, between buildings, between locations separated by miles. The frequency did not change. It did not grow stronger. It did not grow weaker. It remained constant, fixed, independent of space. This was the first point at which the pattern became difficult to ignore, because sound, by definition, depends on transmission. It moves through a medium. It originates from a source. It behaves according to distance, obstruction, and energy. Remove the source, and the sound disappears. Increase the distance, and the sound weakens. Change the environment, and the sound transforms. But this did not. It behaved as though it had no origin, or as though its origin was not located anywhere in the physical world. Some described it as a vibration, not felt through the skin, not detected through touch, but sensed internally, as if awareness itself had acquired texture. Others described it as a tone, but not one that could be isolated, not one that could be separated from perception. It did not sit on top of experience. It sat beneath it, a constant foundation, present regardless of what else occurred. What made the reports more unsettling was their precision. When asked to approximate the frequency, those who could measure it described the same range, between 17 and 19 hertz, a range that exists at the lower boundary of human hearing, a range more often felt than heard, a range known to produce unease when sustained, not because it is loud, but because it interacts with the body in ways conscious awareness does not fully control. Yet no external instrument consistently confirmed its presence. Microphones did not capture it reliably. Audio equipment produced silence, even in environments where observers insisted the frequency was unmistakable. This created a contradiction, a sensation without a signal, a perception without a measurable stimulus. For some, the experience faded into the background, not because it disappeared, but because the brain adapted. The human nervous system is designed to normalize constants, to reduce awareness of anything that does not change. Clothing on the skin, pressure from gravity, the steady presence of the body itself. Anything continuous becomes invisible to conscious attention, unless attention is directed toward it. And once directed, it becomes impossible to fully ignore. More reports continue to appear. Online forums, private messages, obscure discussions buried within unrelated conversations. People hesitant to describe what they were experiencing because they already knew how it would sound. Implausible, subjective, unverifiable. Many waited before saying anything. Some waited months, others waited years. They all hoped it would stop. It never did. The geographic distribution eliminated coincidence. Observers existed across continents, across hemispheres, across regions with no shared technological or environmental connection. There was no single power grid linking them, no single atmospheric condition uniting them, no single structure capable of transmitting a physical signal across such distances without degradation. And yet the frequency as described was identical, not approximately identical, precisely identical. It did not drift. It did not fluctuate. It did not behave like something traveling through space. It behaved like something already present at every location simultaneously. This raised a possibility that was difficult to confront, not because it was impossible, but because it challenged a basic assumption about perception, that sensory experience originates from external reality, that sound enters awareness from the outside, that perception is a response, not a discovery. But what if this was not entering perception? What if it had always been there, waiting beneath the threshold where conscious attention normally operates, hidden not by absence but by filtering? The brain does not show you everything. It shows you what it believes is necessary. Everything else remains suppressed, not removed, just unobserved. The pattern did not announce itself all at once. It assembled slowly, one observer at a time, one report at a time. Each individual unaware of the others when they first noticed it. Each individual believing, at least initially, that the experience belonged only to them, until they discovered it did not. Until they discovered the descriptions matched perfectly. Until they discovered the frequency was not unique. It was shared, not transmitted, not broadcast, shared, as if it existed independent of location, independent of environment, independent of the physical structures normally required for sound to exist. By the time the pattern became undeniable, it was already too late to identify when it had truly begun. Because the reports did not mark the beginning, they marked the moment people noticed. And noticing does not create something new. It reveals what was already there, waiting, steady, unchanged, across every location, across every observer, across every moment. The frequency remained, not arriving, not spreading, simply present, everywhere at once. The attempt to record it. Once enough reports accumulated, the experience could no longer remain confined to personal interpretation. A shared description creates a threshold, a point at which something moves from private perception into collective investigation. Because once multiple observers describe the same anomaly with identical characteristics, the assumption of individual error becomes insufficient to explain it. Patterns demand verification, and verification requires measurement. The first attempts to record it were simple. Standard microphones, professional audio equipment designed to capture frequencies far below the range of normal hearing, controlled environments intended to eliminate interference. Observers who reported hearing the frequency were asked to sit inside recording spaces while instruments monitored the air around them. They were told to remain still, to listen, to indicate the exact moment the frequency was most noticeable. The equipment recorded continuously. Minutes passed, hours passed. The observers confirmed the same thing. The frequency was present, unchanged, steady. But when the recordings were reviewed, there was nothing there. No identifiable signal, no sustained low-frequency tone, no measurable vibration corresponding to the observer's experience. Only silence, not reduced sound, not distorted sound. Absence. This was not the expected result. Even the faintest physical vibration produces some measurable effect. Sound is movement. Movement leaves evidence, but this left none. At first, the failure was attributed to equipment limitations. Perhaps the instruments were not sensitive enough. Perhaps the frequency existed just below their detection threshold. So more advanced equipment was introduced, highly sensitive microphones capable of detecting infrasonic frequencies, devices used in geological monitoring, devices capable of detecting distant earthquakes, atmospheric pressure shifts, and structural vibrations occurring miles away. If the frequency existed physically, these instruments would find it. Observers were brought back. The same procedure was repeated. Isolation, stillness, attention. They confirmed the same thing. The frequency remained stable, continuous, undeniable. The instruments recorded everything: air pressure, environmental vibration, subtle fluctuations invisible to human senses. When the data was analyzed, faint irregularities appeared. Small deviations, barely distinguishable from background noise, not consistent, not stable, not sufficient to isolate as a distinct signal. The anomalies did not match the observer's certainty. They did not match the precision of the reported experience. They behaved like interference, not like a source. This created the first measurable contradiction. The observers were consistent. The instruments were not. Either the observers were perceiving something that did not physically exist, or the instruments were failing to detect something real. Both possibilities were equally unacceptable, because both challenged the reliability of observation. More controlled environments were constructed, soundproof rooms designed to eliminate all external vibration, walls layered with dense material to absorb even the lowest frequencies, rooms suspended on isolation mounts to prevent structural transmission, spaces built to contain silence itself. Observers entered these rooms. The doors were sealed. The external world was removed. Inside there was nothing, no airflow, no machinery, no detectable vibration, only the observer and their awareness. They were asked a simple question: is the frequency present? They answered yes, immediately, without hesitation. The instruments again recorded nothing, no vibration in the air, no structural resonance, no measurable sound, total silence. This result should have eliminated the frequency entirely, because sound cannot exist without a medium, without movement, without energy transfer. Remove those elements and sound disappears. But this did not disappear. It remained, independent of environment, independent of isolation, independent of measurement. This was the point at which researchers began to question the assumption that the frequency was behaving like sound at all. Because sound travels, sound propagates, sound requires transmission, but transmission leaves evidence. This did not leave evidence, at least not in the expected places. Some researchers attempted a different approach. Instead of recording the environment, they recorded the observer, brain activity, neural patterns, subtle changes in electrical behavior within the nervous system. If the frequency existed only in perception, it would still produce a measurable response. The brain reacts to stimuli, even internal stimuli, especially internal stimuli. Observers were placed inside monitoring systems. Their neural activity recorded as they reported hearing the frequency. Patterns emerged, not in the external world, but inside the observer. Specific regions associated with auditory processing showed activity, consistent activity, stable activity, as though responding to a continuous signal. But there was no external source, no incoming sound, no physical vibration entering the ear, and yet the brain behaved as though something was there. This created a second contradiction. The brain does not respond without cause. It does not process signals that do not exist, unless the signal originates internally. But internally generated sounds behave differently. They fluctuate, they drift, they lack precision. This did not. This was stable, exact, persistent. It behaved like an external signal without being external. Some researchers propose that the frequency existed at a level below conventional detection, not absent, not imaginary, simply inaccessible to the instruments being used. Others propose that the frequency was not entering the observer through sensory organs at all, that it did not travel through air, that it did not rely on vibration, that it existed as a property of perception itself, not transmitted, not received, simply present. Attempts were made to record it indirectly. Observers were placed in separate locations, separated by distance. separated by barriers designed to prevent any shared physical signal. They were asked to indicate in real time the intensity of the frequency they perceived. Their responses were compared. They matched, not perfectly, but with enough consistency to eliminate coincidence. When one observer reported the frequency becoming more noticeable, others often reported the same shift, despite being physically isolated from one another, despite sharing no environment, despite having no possible means of exchanging a signal. This suggested something even more difficult to explain. The frequency was not behaving like something located in space. Because space introduces delay, space introduces variation, space introduces loss. This introduced none. It remained consistent, across observers, across locations, across isolation. The instruments continued to fail, not completely, but consistently enough to prevent confirmation. They captured fragments, irregular traces, hints of structure that dissolved under examination. Nothing stable enough to prove the frequency existed physically, but nothing stable enough to prove it did not. The attempt to record it produced only one clear result. The observer could not be separated from the signal, because the signal did not behave like something outside the observer. It behaved like something intrinsic to observation itself. Something that did not need to travel, something that did not need to propagate, something that did not need to arrive. Because it had never been absent, the instruments waited for it to appear, but it never appeared, because it was already there, not in the room, not in the air, not in the equipment, inside the only place it had ever existed. Awareness, steady, continuous, present, and impossible to fully extract. The first anomaly. Up to this point, the phenomenon could still be contained within uncertainty. It could still be classified as ambiguous, unverified, open to interpretation. The reports were consistent, yes. The recording attempts were inconclusive, yes. But inconclusive does not mean impossible. It leaves room for error, for oversight, for missing variables that have not yet been identified. Science is comfortable with uncertainty. It is not comfortable with contradiction. And the first true contradiction appeared quietly, not as a dramatic event, not as a sudden discovery, but as a small detail that refused to align with expectation. It began with distance. One of the fundamental properties of sound is attenuation. The farther you move from its source, the weaker it becomes. This is not a suggestion. It is not theoretical. It is a physical rule. Energy disperses. Vibration loses intensity as it spreads through space. If the frequency existed in the environment, then movement should affect it. Researchers began conducting mobility tests. Observers who reported hearing the frequency were asked to move through controlled spaces while describing changes in intensity. They walked across rooms, down hallways, between floors, into open areas, into enclosed chambers. The expectation was simple. If the frequency had a source, proximity would matter. It did not. There was no measurable change, not stronger near walls, not weaker near open space, not louder near machinery, not softer underground. The intensity remained stable. It did not fluctuate with location. It did not react to barriers. It did not respond to movement. It was as if space had no influence over it. This was the first anomaly, because space influences everything that travels through it. Light weakens over distance, sound dissipates, heat disperses, but this frequency did not behave like something traveling. It behaved like something fixed. But fixed where? That question introduced the second anomaly. Observers were transported to geographically distant locations, different cities, different altitudes, different climates. One group was flown hundreds of miles away from their original reporting site. Another was transported underground to a facility specifically designed to isolate seismic vibration. If the frequency originated from a large-scale environmental source, industrial infrastructure, atmospheric resonance, planetary vibration, then relocation should produce measurable change. It did not. The frequency remained identical. Same intensity, same steadiness, same position within perception, not delayed, not altered, not distorted. The relocation introduced no variation, which suggested something even more destabilizing. The frequency did not exist in the environment at all. But even that conclusion could be resisted. Perhaps it existed globally. Perhaps it was planetary in scale. There are natural resonances within the Earth's atmosphere, low-frequency electromagnetic and acoustic phenomena that encircle the globe. Maybe this was one of them. But planetary phenomena are measurable. They are recorded by monitoring stations. They fluctuate. They respond to solar activity. They shift with atmospheric pressure. This did none of those things. It remained constant, unresponsive, untouched by environmental change. The third anomaly emerged during sensory deprivation testing. Observers were placed in environments designed to remove external stimuli almost completely. Darkness, silence, neutral temperature, no external reference points. When the brain is deprived of input, it often generates its own. Hallucinations, auditory distortions, visual patterns. The mind compensates for absence. If the frequency were a product of sensory isolation, it should intensify under these conditions. It did not intensify, it did not weaken. It remained precisely the same as it had been in normal environments. The lack of external input did not amplify it, because it was never competing with external input. It was beneath it, constant, unmoved by silence, unmoved by noise, unmoved by environment. At this stage, one possibility became difficult to avoid. The frequency did not behave like a stimulus. It behaved like a baseline, a foundational layer of perception. Something so constant that it normally escapes detection. Like gravity, like the pressure of the atmosphere, like the presence of the body itself. The human nervous system filters constants. Anything unchanging fades from awareness, not because it disappears, but because attention shifts toward change. Change signals importance, change signals threat, change demands response. Constants do not, unless attention turns inward, unless awareness detaches from external variation and begins examining itself. This led to the fourth anomaly. Attention influenced detection, not intensity, detection. Observers who actively focused on the frequency reported becoming more aware of it, not because it grew louder, but because their attention sharpened around it. Observers distracted by complex tasks often reported forgetting it temporarily, but when asked whether it was gone, they hesitated. Because gone was not accurate, it had not ceased, it had simply receded beneath conscious priority. The moment attention returned, so did clarity. This suggested something profound. The frequency did not require energy to sustain itself. It required awareness to be noticed. And awareness did not create it. Awareness revealed it. The fifth anomaly appeared when observers attempted to mask it. White noise generators were introduced, low-frequency countertones, competing vibrations designed to overwhelm the range in which the frequency supposedly existed. In normal acoustic conditions, masking works. Introduce a stronger signal at the same frequency range, and the weaker signal disappears. But the frequency did not disappear. Observers reported that white noise covered external sound, but the underlying frequency remained, unmoved, as if it were not occupying the same perceptual channel, as if it were not competing with acoustic input at all. This contradicted the entire premise of auditory masking, which only works if both signals share the same medium. The frequency did not behave like something moving through air. It behaved like something inherent to perception. The final anomaly, the one that made dismissal impossible, emerged during synchronized observation. Two individuals were placed in separate, isolated rooms. No communication, no shared environment. They were asked to focus on the frequency at predetermined intervals and rate its perceived intensity. Their responses were recorded independently, later compared. The shifts aligned, not perfectly, but closely enough to eliminate randomness. When one reported the frequency becoming more noticeable, the other often reported the same increase within seconds. There was no physical connection between them, no shared acoustic channel, no measurable signal linking the rooms. If the frequency existed externally, it would require a medium connecting both observers. If it existed internally, it should vary independently. It did neither. It behaved as though it were a shared constant, accessible to anyone who tuned their awareness toward it. This was the first true anomaly, not because it proved the frequency existed, but because it proved it did not obey the rules expected of sound. It did not attenuate with distance. It did not respond to environment. It did not fluctuate with isolation. It could not be masked. It could not be located. It could not be separated from awareness. At some point, the question shifted. It was no longer, where is the source? It became, what if source is the wrong concept? Because source implies origin. Origin implies location. Location implies space. And this frequency did not behave as though it occupied space at all. It behaved as though it existed prior to space, prior to environment, prior to external stimulus, not traveling through the world, but present wherever perception existed. The first anomaly was not the sound itself. The first anomaly was that it did not need a source. And if it did not need a source, then it was never arriving. It was never spreading. It was never being transmitted. It was simply there, steady, unmoved, waiting to be noticed. The threshold. There is a boundary inside perception that most people never notice. Not because it is hidden, not because it is locked away, but because it is perfectly stable, and stability is invisible. The human brain is not designed to show you everything. It is designed to show you what changes, movement, contrast, disruption. Anything that shifts against a background becomes visible. Anything that remains constant becomes background, and background becomes silence. The frequency did not announce itself because it did not change. It did not spike. It did not pulse. It did not fluctuate in a way that would trigger alarm. It simply existed beneath the surface of perception, steady, continuous, unmoving, which meant it occupied the threshold. The threshold is not a physical barrier. It is not a line drawn between sound and silence. It is a dynamic boundary between what the brain decides to present to awareness and what it filters away. At every moment, your senses collect more information than you could ever consciously process. The pressure of clothing against your skin, the faint electrical hum inside walls, the subtle weight of gravity pulling constantly downward, the rhythm of your own breathing, the microscopic sounds within your own body. All of it exists. Almost none of it reaches awareness. Because if it did, stability would collapse. You would be overwhelmed by constancy. So the brain removes it, not by eliminating it, but by classifying it as unimportant. The frequency appears to live in that removed space, not absent, not silent, simply filtered. Most people pass through their lives without ever approaching that boundary. They remain focused outward, on movement, on narrative, on events that demand reaction. But when attention shifts inward, when external stimulation decreases, when silence extends long enough for awareness to settle, the threshold becomes thinner, and things that were previously background begin to surface. This is not mystical, it is neurological. When the brain reduces its engagement with external change, it begins amplifying internal signals. In deep quiet, you can hear your heartbeat. In stillness, you can feel blood moving through your hands. In darkness, you begin to notice faint visual noise that was always present. The frequency behaves like one of those signals, except it does not belong to the body in any obvious way. It does not sync with pulse. It does not fluctuate with breath. It does not accelerate with stress. It remains constant regardless of physiological state, which suggests something unusual. It is not generated by the body, but it is revealed when the body becomes quiet. Observers who reported hearing it often describe the same progression. At first, there was nothing, just normal silence. Then, after minutes of sustained stillness, something subtle emerged, not arriving from outside, not beginning at a specific moment, but becoming noticeable, as if a layer had been peeled back, as if attention had crossed a boundary it normally does not cross. That boundary is the threshold. Below it, constants exist without being acknowledged. Above it, change dominates awareness. The threshold moves. It shifts based on attention, on environment, on cognitive load. When you are distracted, it lowers. When you are quiet, it rises. The frequency does not cross the threshold on its own. It waits. And when attention drifts toward it, when awareness becomes sufficiently still, it becomes detectable. Not louder, not stronger, just clearer. This is why most people never hear it, not because it is rare, but because their attention never remains quiet long enough. Modern environments are filled with interruption, notifications, conversation, movement, continuous novelty. The threshold remains thick, internal constants remain suppressed, but remove those interruptions. Sit in silence, do not seek distraction, do not fill the space. Let attention settle. Eventually, something shifts. The silence no longer feels empty, it feels textured. There is depth to it, a faint structure beneath it, and within that structure, the frequency. Some who encounter it describe a moment of hesitation, a subtle discomfort, not because the sound is frightening, but because it feels foundational. It feels older than the moment, older than the room, older than the situation. It does not feel like something that started. It feels like something that has always been there. And that realization is destabilizing, because if it has always been there, then silence was never silent. Silence was simply unexamined. The threshold protects coherence. It ensures that awareness is dominated by change, because change signals relevance. But constants can carry deeper information. They define the frame within which change occurs. They are the structure behind the scene. The frequency may not be an event. It may be structure, not a signal moving through perception, but the carrier upon which perception itself operates. A baseline, a continuous oscillation beneath conscious thought. You do not notice the screen while watching a film. You notice the images projected onto it, but the images cannot exist without the screen. The frequency feels like that, not part of the content of experience, but part of its substrate. When observers attempt to describe crossing the threshold, they often struggle with language, because nothing dramatic happens. There is no surge, no flash, no moment of revelation, just a gradual recognition, a realization that silence contains something, something stable, something unmoving, something that does not respond to attention but becomes visible through it. And once noticed, it becomes difficult to unnotice. Not because it grows stronger, but because awareness has learned where to look. The threshold does not close completely once crossed. It can lower again. Distraction can bury the frequency beneath activity, but the memory of it remains, and returning to stillness brings it back instantly. This suggests that the threshold is not a barrier preventing access. It is a filter maintaining stability. The frequency does not need to travel upward through layers of perception. It is already present at every level. It is simply not highlighted until attention chooses it or stumbles upon it, which raises a final possibility. What if the threshold is not protecting you from noise, but protecting you from structure? What if beneath all change, beneath all movement, beneath all narrative, there is a constant field of oscillation that defines perception itself? And what if that field is what you are detecting? Not a sound in the room, not a vibration in the air, but the baseline hum of awareness, the system running beneath experience. The frequency does not behave like something external attempting to enter perception. It behaves like something internal waiting to be noticed. And the only barrier between you and it is the threshold. Not physical, not spatial, but attentional. The moment awareness becomes quiet enough, thin enough, still enough, the boundary dissolves. And what was once background becomes undeniable, not because it started, but because you finally crossed the line where it was allowed to exist. In your awareness, steady, continuous, present, just beneath everything else, waiting. The observation. By the time the frequency had been studied, debated, and isolated from every environmental explanation, one fact remained unavoidable. It did not behave like a phenomenon. It behaved like a condition. There is a difference. A phenomenon happens. A condition is already there. The sound, if it could still be called that, did not arrive. It did not escalate. It did not spread. It did not begin in any identifiable moment. It revealed itself only when attention turned inward and remained there long enough for the threshold to thin, which meant the most important variable was no longer the environment. It was the observer. For centuries, science operated on a simple assumption. Reality exists independently, and observation merely detects it. The world generates signals, the senses receive them, the brain interprets them. Input, processing, output, linear, clean, contained. But the frequency did not fit that model, because when observers described it carefully, something unusual appeared in their language. They did not say, "I hear it in the room." They said, "I hear it." Not out there, here. When asked to point to its location, most hesitated. It was not in front of them, not behind them, not above, not below. It did not occupy direction. It occupied awareness, as if it were evenly distributed across the field of perception, as if it were not localized at all. One participant in a long-term study described it this way: "It's not a sound I'm listening to. It's something I'm listening from." That distinction changed everything. Because if the frequency were part of the observer rather than part of the environment, then recording the environment would never capture it. The instruments were aimed at the wrong target. The attempt to isolate it had always assumed it traveled through space. But what if it traveled through cognition? This was the turning point. Researchers began shifting focus away from physical detection and toward experiential mapping. Observers were asked to describe not just the sound, but the state of awareness in which it became clear. Patterns emerged. The frequency was easiest to detect when the observer was neither tense nor relaxed, neither focused nor distracted. It appeared most clearly in a state of open, neutral attention, not concentration, not effort, just awareness resting on itself. When observers tried to listen harder, the frequency sometimes seemed to recede. When they stopped trying and allowed perception to settle, it returned, which suggested something subtle but critical. The frequency was not responding to effort, it was responding to clarity. Effort introduces internal noise. Expectation creates distortion. Desire for confirmation shifts attention outward again. But simple observation, without demand, allowed the frequency to remain visible. This is where the phenomenon stopped behaving like sound entirely. Sound interacts with the ear. It stimulates physical structures. It generates measurable vibration. But this frequency behaved like it interacted with awareness directly, not through the ear, through perception itself, which led to an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the frequency was not something being perceived. Perhaps it was the act of perception. To understand that possibility, consider something simple. Close your eyes. Notice the darkness. At first, it appears empty, but remain there. You begin to see faint grain, subtle visual noise, a moving field that was always present but overshadowed by external light. That noise is not coming from outside. It is the baseline activity of your visual system. You are not seeing darkness. You are seeing the system that allows sight. The frequency feels similar. It is not an object within awareness. It is the texture of awareness, a low, steady oscillation beneath all experience, not changing, not modulating, just constant. Observers who sat with it long enough reported something else. It did not interfere with thought. It did not drown out sound. It did not demand focus. It coexisted with everything. Conversations could happen. Music could play. Movement could occur. And beneath it all, the frequency remained. Untouched, like a floor beneath shifting furniture, which means it was not competing for space and perception. It was the space. This realization altered the investigation entirely. The goal was no longer to capture a signal. The goal was to understand a condition. Observers were guided into controlled meditative states, not spiritual exercises, not belief systems, just structured stillness. In those states, nearly everyone eventually reported encountering something similar. Some called it vibration, some called it hum, some called it pressure, but the descriptions converged. It was always low, always steady, always constant, and always internal. Even those who had never heard of the phenomenon described it once their awareness settled deeply enough, which eliminated suggestion as the primary cause. The observation did not require prior belief. It required stillness. At this point, a deeper question emerged. If the frequency was part of awareness itself, why did only some people notice it spontaneously? The answer may lie in cognitive filtering. Most people live in continuous engagement with external stimulus, noise, tasks, language, movement. These create layers of perceptual distraction. The threshold remains thick, but individuals prone to introspection, solitude, or heightened sensory sensitivity often approach the boundary more easily. They notice background elements others ignore. They cross the threshold without intending to, which means the first reports were not anomalies. They were early observers. The frequency was not spreading. Awareness of it was. The final shift in understanding came when researchers stopped asking, "Where is it coming from?" and began asking, "What is it made of?" Not physically, structurally. If awareness requires neural oscillation, electrical activity cycling through networks at specific frequencies, then perception itself is built on rhythmic patterns. The brain is never silent. It pulses, it synchronizes, it maintains background activity even in complete sensory deprivation. What if the frequency was not acoustic at all? What if it was the lowest common rhythm of conscious processing? Not something entering awareness, but something enabling it, a carrier wave beneath cognition, a constant oscillation that holds perception together. This would explain why it does not attenuate, why it does not respond to environment, why it cannot be masked, why it does not weaken with distance. Because it does not travel. It is not moving through air. It is moving through neural structure, through awareness, through you. The observation, then, is not of an external mystery. It is of an internal architecture. Most people never notice the structure of their own perception. They see the world, they hear sounds, they feel sensations, but they rarely examine the field in which those experiences occur. The frequency becomes noticeable when that examination begins, not because something new appears, but because something foundational becomes visible. And once seen, it changes the relationship between observer and observed. You are no longer just receiving reality. You are noticing the mechanism that receives it. The hum is not in the room. It is not in the walls. It is not in the air. It is in the field of awareness that makes rooms, walls, and air perceivable, which leads to a final, destabilizing insight. If the frequency is part of awareness itself, then every conscious being shares it, not through transmission, not through broadcast, but through structure. The same baseline oscillation, the same underlying hum, the same steady foundation beneath thought. It was never a sound traveling through space. It was the sound of perception sustaining itself. And the moment you notice it, you are no longer just hearing something. You are observing the condition that allows you to hear it all. Steady, continuous, always there, not entering you, but emerging from the simple fact that you are aware. The experiment. The most difficult part of studying the frequency was not detecting it. It was isolating the moment it became undeniable, because unlike external stimuli, it did not arrive at a predictable time. It did not respond to triggers. It did not increase when provoked. It revealed itself only when the observer reached a specific state, a state that could not be forced, only allowed. This created a problem. Science depends on repeatability, controlled conditions, predictable cause and effect. But the frequency did not follow conventional cause and effect. It followed attention, which meant the experiment could not be designed around environment alone. It had to be designed around awareness. The first formal experiment built around this principle was deceptively simple. No complex machinery, no acoustic stimulation, no invasive measurement, just a room, a chair, and time. Participants were not told what to expect. They were not told what they were listening for. They were only given instructions. Sit still, remain awake, do not speak, do not use any external devices, do not intentionally search for anything, just remain aware. The room itself was carefully controlled, soundproofed walls, no electrical hum, no airflow, no visible distractions. Light was kept neutral, not bright enough to stimulate alertness, not dim enough to encourage sleep. The goal was not sensory deprivation. It was sensory neutrality, a state where external input neither dominated nor disappeared. Participants entered one at a time. Each session lasted exactly 1 hour. At first, nothing unusual happened. Most participants reported the same initial experience: restlessness, awareness of their own body, subtle discomfort from remaining still, the mind producing its normal stream of thoughts, memory fragments, internal dialogue, the brain resisting stillness. This phase was expected. The nervous system is designed to detect change. When change disappears, it creates its own. But eventually, something shifted. Not in the room, in the participant. Thought slowed, not stopped, but lost urgency. Attention stopped reaching outward. It stopped scanning for stimulation. It settled. And in that settling, perception changed. Participants began reporting something subtle. Not immediately, not gradually, a faint, steady presence. Some described it as vibration. Others described it as tone. Others struggled to describe it at all. They simply said something was there, not new, not arriving, just noticeable. At this point in the experiment, participants were asked a single question: when did it begin? Most could not answer, because it had not begun. It had been present before they noticed it. They simply became aware of it at a specific moment, which meant the experiment had not created the frequency, it had revealed it. This distinction became the central focus. The experiment was repeated with variations: shorter sessions, longer sessions, different rooms, different participants, different geographic locations. The results remained consistent. Those who remained still long enough eventually encountered the same thing. Not everyone, but enough to eliminate coincidence. The timing varied. Some noticed it after 10 minutes, some after 30, some only in the final moments of the session. But the descriptions converged. Always low, always steady, always constant, never fluctuating, never behaving like something external entering the room. Participants often described a moment of hesitation, not fear, but uncertainty, because the experience contradicted expectation. Silence was supposed to be empty. This was not empty. It contained structure. One participant described it simply, "It feels like the silence has a floor." Another said, "It was there before I listened." The experiment introduced another variable. Participants were asked to leave the room after detecting the frequency and return to a normal environment. Noise, movement, conversation, external stimulation. They were asked whether the frequency disappeared. Most said no, it became less noticeable, but not absent, which suggested something critical. External noise did not remove the frequency, it only obscured it, like light obscures stars during the day. The stars do not disappear, they remain, hidden behind brighter signals. Participants were brought back for follow-up sessions days later. They were asked to sit again. This time, detection occurred faster, much faster, sometimes within seconds, which meant something had changed, not the frequency. The observer, their awareness had learned where to look. The threshold had become easier to cross. Repeated exposure reduced the time required to detect it. This indicated that the frequency was not transient, not conditional. It did not need to be recreated. It only needed to be noticed. A final variation of the experiment introduced distraction. Participants were asked to perform cognitive tasks while sitting in the same controlled environment. Mathematical problems, memory exercises, structured thinking. During these tasks, most participants reported losing awareness of the frequency. But when the tasks ended and attention relaxed, the frequency returned instantly, not gradually, immediately, which confirmed the central conclusion. Attention did not generate the frequency. Attention filtered it. Focused cognition buried it beneath active processing. Passive awareness allowed it to surface. This aligned with everything observed before. The frequency was not dependent on environment, not dependent on location, not dependent on physical conditions. It was dependent on awareness state. The experiment did not introduce the signal. It removed the distractions that concealed it. At the end of the study, participants were asked one final question. Do you believe the frequency was created during the experiment? Almost none said yes, because creation implies beginning, and nothing about the frequency felt like a beginning. It felt like discovery, something that had always existed beneath perception, waiting beneath layers of constant stimulation, waiting beneath thought, waiting beneath attention itself. The experiment did not prove the frequency existed physically. It proved something else. That awareness contains more than it reveals. That silence is not empty. That beneath every moment of perception, there may be structures so constant, so stable, that the brain removes them entirely. Not because they are unimportant, but because they never change. And in a system designed to detect change, constants become invisible. Until attention stops moving. Until awareness stops searching, until observation turns inward. And the moment that happens, the frequency is there, not arriving, not appearing, just present as it always was. Steady, continuous, waiting. The final realization. At the beginning, the question was simple. What is the source? That question shaped everything that followed. It assumed distance. It assumed transmission. It assumed that something somewhere was generating a signal that traveled outward until it reached the ear. That assumption is so fundamental that it rarely feels like an assumption at all. Sound comes from somewhere. Light comes from somewhere. Signals move through space. But the frequency did not behave like something moving. It did not weaken. It did not distort. It did not respond to barriers. It did not disappear in isolation. It did not fluctuate with environment. It did not require external conditions to remain stable, which meant the original question was flawed. There was no source to locate because nothing was being sent. The realization did not arrive dramatically. It did not appear as a breakthrough moment in a laboratory. It emerged slowly, as every failed attempt to isolate the frequency removed another possibility. If it were mechanical, it would vary with proximity. It did not. If it were atmospheric, it would fluctuate with pressure. It did not. If it were structural, it would disappear underground. It did not. If it were psychological, it would drift, distort, or fragment. It did not. Every category designed to contain it failed, until only one remained. It was not external, and it was not imaginary. It was structural. Not structure in the environment, structure in awareness. To understand the weight of that realization, you have to reconsider something fundamental. You assume that you perceive the world directly, that sound enters your ears, that images enter your eyes, that reality arrives fully formed, and your mind simply interprets it. But perception is construction. The brain builds the world you experience. It receives signals, yes, but what you experience is a model, a continuously updated simulation built from incoming data. And like any system that runs continuously, it requires a baseline, a carrier, a steady rhythm that holds everything together. Neural activity is not random. It oscillates. Electrical patterns pulse in synchronized frequencies. Some are fast and sharp, others are slow and foundational. Without these rhythms, perception collapses. The frequency described in every report, low, steady, unchanging, matches something else, not a sound, a baseline oscillation. The lowest layer of conscious processing, the hum of the system maintaining awareness. This explains why it cannot be recorded externally, because it is not traveling through air. It is traveling through neural architecture. It explains why it cannot be masked, because it is not competing with sound. It is the field in which sound is interpreted. It explains why distance does not affect it, because it is not located in space. It is located in cognition. And it explains why silence reveals it, because silence reduces competing input, allowing the foundational layer to become perceptible. The final realization was not that the world contained a mysterious signal. It was that awareness does. The frequency was never entering you. It was never arriving from outside. It was never being transmitted. It was already there, not as an object, as a condition. The sound does not travel through space. It travels through you. More precisely, it is the vibration of the system that allows you to experience space at all. And once that becomes clear, the fear dissolves. Because there is nothing invading perception. There is nothing hidden in the walls. There is nothing broadcasting across continents. There is only the structure of awareness, briefly exposed. The reason it feels unsettling is simple. You are not accustomed to perceiving the foundation of your own perception. You are accustomed to content, to events, to changes, to narratives unfolding across time. But when you encounter something that does not change, something that remains perfectly stable regardless of environment, you are confronting the background of experience itself. It feels ancient because it is continuous. It feels external because it does not respond to thought. It feels omnipresent because it is inseparable from awareness. The frequency is not a message. It is not a warning. It is not a signal from elsewhere. It is the sound of the system running. Most of the time it is filtered out, not because it is dangerous, but because it is constant, and constants do not demand attention. Until attention turns inward, until the threshold thins, until silence becomes deep enough to reveal what has always been there. That is the final realization. There is no source to hunt, no anomaly to eliminate, no broadcast to trace. There is only awareness becoming aware of itself. The hum you hear in stillness is not evidence of something approaching. It is evidence of something sustaining. And once you recognize it as such, the question shifts. Not where does it come from, but why did I never notice it before? The answer is simple, because you were listening outward. Now you are listening inward. And inward, beneath thought, beneath sound, beneath the movement of the world, there is a steady foundation, unmoving, unbroken, continuous. It does not begin, it does not end, it does not travel, it remains, not in the room, not in the air, but in the simple, undeniable fact that you are aware. The frequency is not separate from you. It is the quiet evidence that awareness is active, and it has been there in every moment of your life, waiting beneath everything else, steady, continuous, present. Closing. There is no final recording to play, no last waveform to analyze, no frequency chart that reveals what the sound truly was. Because by now, the question has shifted. It is no longer, where is it coming from, or how is it transmitted, or why can't we measure it? The question has narrowed, it has turned inward. Why does it require you? At the beginning, it seemed external, a phenomenon, a signal, something occurring somewhere in the physical world that had simply not yet been traced to its source. That assumption allowed distance. Distance allowed safety. If it was out there, then it could be located, mapped, neutralized, explained. If it was out there, then you were only a witness. But every attempt to fix it in the world failed. Microphones captured silence. Sensors detected nothing. Rooms remained acoustically unchanged. Yet the sound persisted, not as imagination, not as hallucination, not as a symptom of stress or suggestion. It remained precise, low, steady, always the same. The only constant variable was the observer, you or someone like you. That detail was dismissed at first because it seemed unscientific. Subjective experience cannot serve as primary evidence. It must be verified by instruments, corroborated by independent systems. But when the instruments report nothing, and the only consistent data point is perception itself, the hierarchy begins to fracture. What if perception is not secondary? What if it is the medium? Throughout this entire sequence, you may have been waiting for the reveal. A hidden transmitter, a classified military experiment, an underground geological resonance, an atmospheric anomaly, something dramatic, something physical, something that allows the comfort of explanation. But none of those survived scrutiny. Every external model collapsed. And what remains is uncomfortable because it cannot be extracted and placed on a lab table. The sound does not travel through air. It does not travel through matter. It does not diminish with distance. It does not increase with proximity. It does not obey acoustic laws. It does not interact with barriers. It does not register as vibration. It does not appear on instruments. And yet, it is heard. That leaves only one remaining pathway. It travels through you, not metaphorically, structurally. Experience is not something you observe from the outside. It is the field in which everything appears. Every sound you have ever heard has existed not out there, but as a pattern inside awareness. Even when there's an external source, what you actually encounter is interpretation, electrical signals translated into experience. But this sound bypasses the external trigger. It appears without impact, without compression waves, without mechanical cause, which means its origin is not spatial. It does not begin in a location. It begins at the point of perception. This is why recording it fails. Recording assumes the sound exists independently of the listener, that it can be isolated and captured, stored. But if the sound is inseparable from the act of awareness, then it cannot be extracted. It is not a thing. It is an event. And the event only occurs when observation is present. Notice something subtle. If you try to recall the sound now, you may not hear it, but you can almost sense where it would be. A space in attention, a low anticipation. That gap is not empty. It is structured. The mind expects continuity. It expects that if something existed before, it should exist again under similar conditions. But this sound never followed environmental triggers. It followed focus. It appeared when attention shifted inward, when external noise quieted, when the boundary between perception and observer thinned. That is why some people heard it at night, in silence, in isolation, not because night creates it, but because night reduces interference. Daylight fills awareness with movement, conversation, task, distraction. There is less room for subtle anomalies. In stillness, the structure of experience becomes visible, and within that structure, something is resonating. You may still resist this conclusion. That is natural. The mind prefers external causation. It prefers objects. Objects can be solved. But what if the sound was never a signal from outside the system? What if it is a property of the system itself? Every system has baseline noise. In electronics, even in perfect circuits, there is residual activity. Not error, not malfunction, simply the trace of existence. What if awareness has the same? What if consciousness hums? Not loudly, not disruptively, just enough to remind itself that it is present. If that is true, then the sound is not invading, it is not warning, it is not communicating, it is not hostile, it is not guiding, it is the echo of being. And that realization changes the narrative entirely, because you cannot turn it off. You cannot block it. You cannot record it. You cannot destroy it. It is as inseparable from you as perception itself. And here is the part that matters most. If the sound requires you to exist, then it is not happening to you. It is happening as you. This does not mean you are generating it intentionally. It does not mean you control it. It means that the boundary between source and receiver was never as clear as it seemed. The entire investigation assumed separation, a sound, a world, a listener. But if the sound only manifests within awareness, and awareness is the field in which all phenomena appear, then the distinction dissolves. There is no distance to measure, no path to trace, no origin to locate, only presence. This is why the phenomenon does not escalate. It does not grow louder. It does not change frequency. It does not evolve into something dramatic. Because it is not a message building toward climax. It is a constant, a floor beneath experience. You may ask, why did some people notice it while others did not? Because most people do not listen to the silence beneath their thoughts. They listen to content, language, emotion, memory. But beneath all of that is a stable background. Most of the time it goes unnoticed because attention is elsewhere. When attention returns to itself, the background becomes perceptible, and the background hum feels like something foreign because we are unaccustomed to observing it directly. This is the threshold the investigation approached but never crossed. The moment where the question shifts from, what is the sound, to, what is the nature of the listener? And that question is not comfortable, because it destabilizes the familiar model. You believe you are a fixed point moving through a world of objects. But if awareness is the field in which objects appear, then the you that hears is not separate from the hearing. The sound exposes that structure, not by force, not by revelation, but by persistence. It refuses to exist anywhere except in the act of perception. Which means the final discovery is not external, it is structural. There was never a missing transmitter. There was never a hidden machine. There was never a concealed frequency. There was only the unnoticed layer of experience that has always been there. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. Not because it becomes louder, but because the assumption of separation weakens. You can return to daily life. You can move through routines. You can speak, work, rest. Nothing outwardly changes. But somewhere in the background, there is a subtle recognition. The sound does not come from the world. It comes from the fact that there is a world being experienced at all. And that experience has a texture, a baseline, a hum. Not mystical, not dramatic, just present. If you listen now, not with ears but with attention, you may not hear a literal tone, but you may feel the steady fact of awareness itself, unbroken, continuous, silent, yet not empty. That is where the investigation ends. Not with the discovery that adds something new to reality, but with the recognition that the structure of reality as experienced was never silent to begin with. The sound exists, it cannot be captured, it cannot be transmitted, it cannot be shared in a recording, because it is not traveling through space, it is traveling through you, and it has been there the entire time.